Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Hi, welcome back to Access to Democracy. I'm Roxanne Meshar, and I'm your host for today's show. And we have a guest with us today, Representative Tina Liebling from Rochester, Minnesota, District 26A. Tina, welcome to Access to Democracy. It's wonderful to have you on the show. And you are also seeking DFL candidacy for governor. And this is a nice opportunity to share what you're thinking, your political focus and ideas and values that are important to you and to many, many voters throughout the state. So welcome to Access to Democracy, Tina.
Well, thank you, Roxanne. I'm really happy to be here.
Nice to have you. So to begin with, let's kind of give voters a sense and viewers too a sense of your background. So how did you end up in politics? You didn't start out there, so what is the background of Tina Liebling, and how did you get from there to here? So.
Well, that's right. I really never started out to be in politics. I always knew I was a Democrat, and in fact, I grew up in Minneapolis. My dad was a photographer, and he was sort of the unofficial photographer for the DFL party for a time. And so I got dragged along to a lot of political events, but I never thought of running myself. But I married a guy who used to come home from voting and say, I wrote you in for county commissioner, or I wrote you in for judge. And had it not been for his interests, I don't think I ever would have run. He kind of pushed me into realizing that I wanted to run, put it that way.
Very interesting.
Then I got the bug.
Now, so you didn't come straight out of school into the political realm, so you had a few detours, you did some other things, so you had another life, so perhaps share a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. So I'm an attorney. My career's been criminal defense, some of it public defender, some of it private. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I now have a little grandchild for the first time.
Congratulations.
So, did a lot of was a working mom, and lived in Chicago for a few years. That's where my husband is from. Came back to Minnesota, was kind of minding my business when things fell into place for me to run for the legislature. So at that time when I first ran, we had never elected a Democrat in Rochester in about 30 years, since people ran with partisan designation. So I ran the first time, which was 2002, did not win, And as they say now, there's a hashtag. Nevertheless, she persisted.
Yeah.
So I persisted, I ran again, I won, and then I continued to win, and I've been elected 7 times.
Wow, 7 times in Rochester. Very nice. So I think your background as a defense attorney in Minnesota and in Chicago tells us something a little bit about your core values and what's important to you. And particularly, I know you mentioned it's important to stand for those without a voice. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that and what that means for you personally.
Well, there are no attorneys in my family. I was the first, I think. And I decided to go to law school because it seemed like it would be a fit for me, because I'm somebody that wants to stand up and call things out when they need to be called out. And that's something that I've always done. So I guess it was pretty idealistic going to law school. I really wanted to represent people and never wanted to be a corporate lawyer or somebody who just shoveled money around. And I don't mean to be pejorative about that. I mean, a lot of lawyers do very important things. But I wanted to really help people that needed my assistance. So that was why I went into criminal defense. I could have been a prosecutor, but I thought criminal defense was the hard side. and both sides have their tough aspects.
Yes.
But I wanted to be somebody who really fought for the individual. And that's why I really do love that. I also have a master's degree in public health, which I got before I went to law school.
That's very interesting, because I know now healthcare, which we'll talk a little bit more coming up, and health insurance, another big focus of your campaign. So we'll come back to that, but that's important background information that helps you do that work. So very interesting. I know that you identify yourself as a bold progressive, and perhaps you can explain a little more what that means.
Well, a lot of these terms get thrown around a lot these days, liberal, progressive. But what I mean by bold progressive is that I've always been very clear about what I'm for and what I'm not for. And I think that one of the things that's helped me get elected and reelected all those times in a district that is not a solid DFL district. Even now, at least about 40% of my constituents are Republicans. But I've always been very clear about who I am and what I'm for. And I think people appreciate that. They never have to guess. I can disagree with people, and that's fine. I often tell people, I often tell my constituents that no 2 people agree on everything. So my husband and I have been married almost 32 years. We get along very well. We're very close politically, and yet we debate issues and sometimes argue about issues because no 2 people agree.
Yes, which is good. I was reading an article the other day that said the whole idea of there's a linear continuum from alt-left all the way to alt-right isn't really accurate, that that's a false idea of where voters fall on a spectrum, that in fact we have many policies and many policy issues, and people fall in various places for each of those policies. And that kind of fits what you're describing. Be clear about what your policies are, be clear about what your values are, and for various topics in various places, you won't always match everyone 100%, but you will hit the issues that are really important to people's everyday lives, I think.
Right, and you know, I think what I mean by progressive, or one of the meanings of progressive, I believe that government can be a force for good to help people's lives improve. I think of government as being what all of us do together, that we can't do as individuals. Yes. We can't build the road in front of our house. Right. We need government for that. We have to come together to do certain things. And although government sometimes seems to go astray, I believe that government at its best is a force for helping all of us improve our lives. And that's what I want to make sure that government actually does. And one of the big reasons that I'm running.
Works for everyone. I know I often encounter people who want to use least amount of government possible, perhaps, and I mean, I think we should use the least we can get by with. On the other hand, I want to know when I eat my cereal in the morning that it's actually cereal in there, and of course that requires government regulation, requires some oversight or whatever. Roads in front of my house are functioning and not disintegrating, that I have sidewalks, sewers at work, all of those things take various levels of municipal, local, and state and federal government. So very true.
Well, at the same time, I reject the idea that government is too large. No, the question is too large for what, or too small
and where
for what? I mean, the size of government as an abstract is pretty meaningless. But I am also somebody that really believes that adults should get to make their own decisions unless they impact on other people. And in that way, sometimes I find common ground with some libertarians, which is really interesting.
It is interesting, yeah, because libertarians, of course, are interested in minimizing government where and wherever and however possible, more so than maybe most voters would be. So interesting. So you are the gubernatorial candidate seeking the DFL nomination, but you are unique in some ways. I know people who might be familiar with you would know that you are you supported Bernie Sanders, for example, in the 2016 presidential primary, and you have a pretty clear focus on issues. So maybe you can share with viewers a little more about that.
Right. Well, there are right now 6 DFL candidates who are running to be the nominee of the Democratic Party here in Minnesota. And I'm the only one of the 6 who was a Bernie Sanders supporter. And it's not that I don't want us to, start the big debate again, because, this is about looking forward. We have to look forward. But the reason that I supported Bernie Sanders was because I thought he was talking about what's really going on. He talked about the economy being rigged. The economy is rigged. If you look at what's happened even over the last 40 years. So I looked up some numbers, and productivity went over a certain 40-year period, like starting in the mid-70s. Productivity of Americans went up 77%. Wages, average wage, went up 9%.
Yeah, huge
but
discrepancy.
CEO wages and benefits went up 950%. So is it any wonder that people are working 3 jobs, that young people coming out of college have huge debt and they can't get a decent job with benefits? This is a serious, serious issue that we have to confront. And there are a lot of forces at play, of course, but I think that we need to be very clear that government has to be a force that levels the playing field for ordinary people who just need to kind of be able to have the conditions that will help them lift themselves up.
Move forward. I know we have almost totally abandoned fiscal policy in this country. We have focused on monetary policy, one hammer, and it's interest rates, and that's great for shoveling tons of money to 1%ers, but it doesn't work very good for the things you're talking about. It won't increase wages, won't increase demand, won't create new businesses, which is where new businesses come from, increased demand. And fiscal policy does the reverse. It says, when private industry is struggling, government can step in and can provide some projects that benefit the common good, benefit all of us, but also in creating those, provide some demand, create some new jobs, and kind of help the economy get rolling again in ways that puts money in people's pockets. So we've abandoned that fiscal policy since the 70s, so almost 50 years now that we have not used that as a way to adjust the economy, which is a critical lever, not just monetary policy, not just interest rates. And I think those numbers that you talked about are a good reflection of our inability to do that, I think. It's interesting. One of the key issues for you that we mentioned early on in the show today was you have some background in health, and I know health insurance and health care. So I'm going to let you share a little bit about your views on that, and I know it's important to viewers and voters. Yeah.
Well, absolutely, because in the legislature, I've been working on health and human services for quite a long time. So I've been there 13 years. I'm in my 7th term.
Okay.
And I've been on the Health and Human Service Committees most of that time. And so I was there when we implemented the Affordable Care Act. In fact, I was chairing a committee at that time when that had to be done. It came down from the federal government and so on. But I think that we've seen that a system that relies on private insurance is always going to have certain kinds of problems. About a third of our healthcare dollar is actually not being spent on healthcare. So when we think about the way how complicated our system is and all of the things that we do, we add complication to try to make that complicated system actually work for people, when we could really simplify things a lot more. I sometimes say it's like if you want to build a school bus, you don't start with a bicycle chassis because you know, by the time you get there, it's going to cost you a whole lot more. So we have this really complicated system where a lot of our resources are spent deciding who gets what they get, how much is paid to who, and it's bad for patients because when you're sick is the time you should not have to worry about paying and how you're going to pay, and yet people are just worried sick. In addition to being sick, they're worried about the bills. So you've got that piece. Healthcare providers absolutely hate dealing with insurance companies. And when I talk to audiences and I say, how many of you like dealing with insurance companies, I never get a hand up. So, you know, this is really a problem. We need a system that focuses on health care, not health insurance. And I think we can get there. Minnesota has the tools, and I think we can move in that direction. And that is one of the things I would really like to do as governor.
That would be a wonderful thing. I know recently I traveled to 2 small, tiny countries. I was in Slovenia, pretty small, the top of the boot of Italy, and they have healthcare that they provide to all their citizens, and they are a very tiny country, about population, I think, about the size of Minnesota, landmass, I think, less. And then earlier this year, I was in Mauritius, out in the Indian Ocean, a country about the size of Hennepin County in physical size and about that size in population. And they also provide health care for all of their citizens, education as well. So if a tiny country like Mauritius can do it and Slovenia can do it, plus many other countries in the EU, as we know, Canada and so forth, are near neighbor across the border.
Well,
Minnesota can do this.
All advanced countries, I believe, are doing it. They have different systems. They're slightly different, but they get better outcomes than we do for less money, too.
Yes.
So pretty interesting. I mean, it is time to move in that direction.
It really is.
We've seen Republicans in Congress try to figure out what they can do to dismantle the Affordable Care Act and then do something that supposedly is going to be better. Well, I think the answer is you can't. There's nothing better that's going to come by just rolling that back. So I would say we need to go forward. And you know, we've done this. It has helped a lot of folks, but it's still too complicated and too expensive.
Yes. And Minnesota's done it better than most, I have to say, as somebody who navigates my way through that plan, which is very difficult. When I hear what goes on in other states, it's even worse. You can't get prices. Even if you're sick, you don't even know what a test is going to cost. They can't tell you what it's going to cost. Minnesota, for me anyway, in personal experience, has worked out more or less okay, and I'm relatively healthy, and it's easier to navigate, probably one of the better implementations, and still, if not one of the best implementations, and still there's issues and problems, and it's even worse elsewhere. So I'm thinking Minnesota and Minnesotans, we can do better. We can
do better. Absolutely, we can.
So very interesting. What about education? Because that's another hot button, and that's another policy for people. And again, Mauritius providing education for all its citizens, and Slovenia, same thing. So.
Well, one of the things that I think everybody sees is that you can't get a good career any longer with just a high school education. It just those jobs just aren't there. So students need more. They need some college at least, or they need some technical training. So I have a proposal that we provide, that the state of Minnesota would provide tuition-free 2 years of college or 2 years of technical training. And I believe this would be a huge boost for our entire state, because we're in a situation now, not only do we have our young people who can't get the education and training they need, or they come out with tons of debt that weighs down our whole economy, but we need them to have that education and training. We have a smaller workforce coming in. We have aging baby boomers. Already companies are saying they can't find workers who are trained up to their needs. And so this is exactly the kind of gap that we need to fill. If people think that's really radical, well, Minnesota already does provide free college credits through our PSEO program for some number of students, but it's really not fairly distributed. It's not available to everyone. And I think this is something we could focus on. This would really boost our economy in the state. It would attract people. It would keep young people here, which we desperately need.
It would keep companies here.
And it would keep companies here, absolutely. So I think that's a very important thing. The other thing is something that Governor Dayton has focused on, which is, you know, starting early and making sure that our youngest kids have a good start in life, because if we don't, we pay for it later. It's really a pay now, pay later. And besides the equity issues around that, it's in all of our interest to have our young people be functioning at their highest ability.
Absolutely, and so we all benefit from that.
We do.
All, yes, and it's true. You can pay a little bit up front with that early years education, or you can pay very big dollars later trying to retrain or help people get up to speed, or help them be successful in educational environment or in a work environment when they didn't have the head start. And it's much more costly later, or worse, they slip through the system altogether, and then that's a real liability, and that's a loss for them and for us as well, for everyone. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have a few minutes left, and I want a chance for you to share your vision. So, Tina Liebling, as governor of Minnesota, what would be your vision? What would you share with people that's your vision of?
Well, the way I was raised was to think of the working people of the state as the heroes. You know, my dad used to take me around the state photographing people in Minnesota, and he was all about the everyday folk. And he used to talk a lot about the big shots who make life difficult for the everyday folks. You know, we see this all the time. There's certain, you know, the insiders who think that everything is all about them. I'm a person who stands up to the insiders. I'm a person who stands up to the big shots. And one thing about me that people know when they've known me in the legislature is that I'm somebody who can't be intimidated and I can't be bullied. I stand up for what I believe is right, sometimes against great pressure. And I think this is what we need, because the governor will face great pressure. Whether the legislature is still in Republican hands or even if it switches to Democratic hands, the governor is under great pressure and has to be somebody with a backbone and has to really be thinking about the people who don't have a lobbyist at the Capitol. The people who are supposed to be there for those who don't have a lobbyist are the people like me, and I've always taken that very seriously. So some big interest can come in and hire 17 lobbyists. We have to remember that there are people who are going to be affected who are not there at the Capitol every day. And that's what I am absolutely about. I really believe that we can make conditions, have conditions in the state that help everybody rise. We don't need to pit rural against urban. We don't need to pit people of different racial backgrounds or religious backgrounds.
This is true. We
can all benefit.
Policies that help good health care, for example, good education opportunities, that helps everyone.
Absolutely.
It's not
and we all need
limited.
Clean water. We all need education. We all need economic opportunities.
Good infrastructure, safe
Infrastructure.
neighborhoods.
Absolutely. These are issues that cross all boundaries. And I believe that we can do that and really help the ordinary people of Minnesota, help them build better lives for themselves and their kids, because it's gotten pretty serious going the other way, and we need to turn this around.
That's true. That's true. Thank you for articulating that. It's a powerful vision. So you are good at fighting for the underdog, and but I think you have a capacity to be flexible as well, and I think you might want to spend a couple minutes sharing a little bit about that, and then we want to give viewers an opportunity of where they can contact you if they want to learn more about you or volunteer on your campaign. But flexibility, say a little about that.
Well, I often joke that because I've been married 32 years to the same guy, you know that I know how to compromise. And it's true. I mean, compromise is absolutely necessary in politics. We all know that. Where I might differ with some is that I think that before you compromise, you have to lay out your vision and give people an opportunity to respond to that.
Yes.
Before you compromise. And because obviously we need to move forward. We don't want to be so rigid in our positions that we do nothing.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we've seen far too much of that. But I mean, I think I have pretty good relationships with the other side, and the breakdowns that you see are not because people don't work together. They're because at the end of the day, it's become about power. It's become about these big forces that are behind the demands. It's become about the next election. And I've never been about the next election. I'm about what's the right thing to do. And I go back to the voters and I say, look, here's what I thought was the best thing. And if they don't agree with me, they could, vote me out. But, I take a vote that I believe in and that I feel I can explain to people. And that's the best you can do.
That's personal integrity.
I
and
think
wake
so.
up in the morning
and my constituents, I think, have appreciated that over the years. And, that's what I'm doing in my campaign. I am who I am. And I don't pander, and I don't, hide my views.
And pretty straightforward about where you
absolutely.
stand on policies. Voters know what that means for you and what you will work for.
Exactly.
Very good. So, viewers that would want to read more about you and want to connect, maybe and get on your website and perhaps volunteer, where would they go?
Well, I really would like people to go to my website. I have a lot of issues on my website, which is not like a lot of the other candidates, actually, because I am running on the issues. So my website, www.tinaliebling.com.
Okay.
And as I like to tell people, you can remember Tina because it stands for There Is No Alternative.
There is no alternative. Tina, I like that. Liebling, LIEBLING.com.
Yes.
So wonderful. It's been nice to chat with you and have you with us today. I hope you have a chance to come on Access to Democracy again, and it's been great to be able to share and hear your views and policies and ideas with viewers and voters. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye now.